Ahlan wa sahlan fi halaka jadida min hat historian. In this video, I will be talking about a traditional Middle Eastern headdress that, beyond its importance to Arab cultures, has taken on many political connotations. The keffiyeh. The keffiyeh, also known, depending on the pattern, composition, and region, as a ghutra, shemagh, and other variants according to the local Arab dialect, is a large scarf, usually made of cotton, though sometimes wool, often with a two-color pattern woven into it, and worn over the head, either draped and held in place with an agal, or wrapped around like a turban or balaclava. Originating as a simple, practical way for desert peoples to protect themselves from the elements, it has evolved to become an essential element of Gulf formal wear and a powerful symbol of Palestinian rights. So how did a simple scarf become so iconic? The keffiyeh is, essentially, a hat in its most basic sense, a piece of cloth worn over the head to protect oneself from the sun, the cold of night, or sand being blown by the wind. In that sense, it is similar to other such garments worn throughout the world. Like most traditional items of clothing, especially such a simple one, its exact origins in the distant past are almost impossible to determine with accuracy. It is likely that the very first to wear were simply desert men who grabbed a spare piece of cloth to shield themselves from the harsh sun and spread this rather intuitive practice from there. However, it can be seen in more formal representations as far back as ancient Sumer in the 3rd millennium BC, in what is now Iraq, where high priests and rulers wore headscarves similar to some of the styles the keffiyeh or shemagh is now worn. In fact, the name Keffiyeh is derived from a word meaning from Kufa, a city in Iraq. But it is with the desert Bedouin tribes that these headscarves really gained popularity, as they were practical, versatile, and easy to procure. They quickly spread throughout the Middle East and the Levant, all areas with a similar climate. There is also some argument that the Jewish talit, which is also a shawl made in a similar fashion, shares an ancestry with the keffiyeh, and indeed the people who originated them were from a very close area, so the link is likely. Many representations of biblical figures show them, probably accurately, wearing some form of headscarf. In older times, the scarves did not have any particular traditionally established color or pattern. Woven from rough cotton or wool, they tended to be either the color of the raw material or otherwise a whole variety of colors, depending on what the makers had access to. However, it tended to still be an item for desert Bedouins, with higher urban classes wearing turbans or other more adorned pieces of headwear. Nevertheless, the simple keffiyeh continued to spread with Arab conquests, and was usually adopted without fuss, as it was very well suited to the places it was introduced to. It was spread to such places as Egypt and North Africa, or Sudan, and either was introduced there or merged with local headdresses of similar design. The keffiyeh's transition from a simple desert garment to something more established and traditional, with some pedigree and meaning behind it, started to occur in the 18th century, with leaders in the Arabian Peninsula wearing ornate versions of the simple garment instead of the turban, a nod to their Bedouin origins. It can be seen being worn in representations of Abdullah bin Saud al Saud, ancestor to the current king of Saudi Arabia. In the 19th century, it truly emerged throughout the Arab world, with some seeing it as a way to differentiate themselves from their Ottoman rulers, who tended to wear turbans and then fezzes. But it still remained a fairly heterogeneous garment, with all manner of varieties found throughout the Arabian Peninsula, Mesopotamia, Jordan, and the Levant, Oman and Yemen being notable exceptions, tending not to wear them. It was in the 20th century that the keffiyeh, or shemagh, truly took on the appearance we now picture, as well as acquired its place in Arab sartorial codes and its symbolism. Arab lands and customs were still in the early 20th century seen as a place of mystique and exoticism by most Westerners, with the Orientalist movement portraying romanticized versions of the Middle East through art and literature. The striking clothes, so different from European fashions, excited the imagination, and so Westerners who visited these places quickly took to them. Notably, early Zionist immigrants to Palestine often took to wearing keffiyehs as a sign of their desire to integrate with the new homes. And with World War I, the Arab struggle against the Ottoman rule propelled the image of the headscarf-wearing Arab to new heights, particularly with images of British Colonel T.E. Lawrence, the famous Lawrence of Arabia, who wore one during his struggle alongside the members of the Arab Revolt and saw being allowed this manner of dress to be a great honor. While the image of the sheikh in a long coat and headscarf was cemented in Western minds, in the Middle East, the garment was still very fluid in its appearance. While many colors existed, and so did many patterns, most high-class people in the Arabian Peninsula favored simple white headscarves, of the kind still commonly seen in the United Arab Emirates. But in the 1930s, in what would become Jordan, a distinctive red and white checked pattern version began to become popular and would soon become the standard for most countries. Checked patterns were common in headscarves for men throughout the early 20th century, but they were usually made in various colors. One of the people that brought the red and white to the forefront was not, ironically, an Arab, but a British officer stationed in Transjordan during the colonial period, John Bagot Glubb, locally known as Glubb Pasha. Glubb was tasked with forming patrols to maintain order in the desertic lands, which had been unstable due to tribal differences and a divide between the settled cities and the nomadic Bedouin. Unlike his predecessors, who employed urbanites to try and quell the Bedouin, the latter taking very poorly to being policed by people they considered having little to do with them, Glubb created the Desert Patrol, recruiting prominent members from many tribes, with each not wanting to shame his people by performing poorly, and raiders did not want to cause trouble for their tribe members in the patrol. Through this strategy, Glubb brought a measure of stability to the region. Thanks to this, Glubb and his Desert Patrol were seen as an elite, prestigious group. With regards to the Keffiyeh, Glubb had chosen as part of his uniform for his men a red and white checked headscarf, while Glubb himself stated, with a hint of that British paternalism, that it had not even existed in the region before he introduced it, a patently untrue statement. It had not enjoyed the prominence that it would after being associated with these men. It became seen as a symbol of stability and of Bedouins in a position of power. In the decades after World War II, many Arab countries that had previously still been beholden to European powers, notably the British, gained full independence. With this newfound freedom, several, whose borders were rather artificially drawn during the colonial period, sought a new unifying sense of identity, transcending the old tribal differences. Traditional Arab dress was one way they promoted this sense of national pride. In the United Arab Emirates, plain white ghutras were adopted as part of formal wear, and in Saudi Arabia, this was true for solemn events. In Jordan, which wanted to establish itself and not get embroiled in the neighboring Palestinian cultural affairs, Glubb Pasha's red and white keffiyeh, a symbol of those proud desert patrols, was brought back to the forefront as a true Jordanian garment in contrast to the black Palestinian one, a symbol of Jordan's emergence as a nation. And soon, because of its striking appearance, it became popular in Saudi Arabia for daily wear, where it spread quickly in the 1970s. Similarly, this style became common in Iraq and throughout the Arab world, though Emiratis and Omanis, when they wear one, tend to always prefer a plain white one. The keffiyeh, as we now picture it, had established itself, but there is one place, above all, where it took on a deep symbolism that has spread throughout the world: Palestine. It is impossible to talk about keffiyehs today without bringing to mind Palestine and the conflict they have with Israel. And I will note, this conflict, stretching back to Israel's creation, however legitimate or not its claims and methods may or may not be, it is not the subject of this video, and I feel there are many people more qualified than I talking about the matter, so I will leave that to them. However, the black and white keffiyeh has become inescapably linked to the Palestinian cause, and it is probably the first place that comes to mind when the word is said. The keffiyeh has been worn in Palestine, much like the rest of the Arab world, since time immemorial. In Ottoman times, as elsewhere, it was a sign that the wearer tended to be rural, as urban dwellers favored the fez. It is said, though without true confirmation, that the traditional black fishnet pattern, so widespread in Palestinian keffiyehs, was to recognize their people's proximity to the sea and the importance of fishing. Interestingly, as I said before, early Jewish immigrants to the region in the late 19th century generally adopted the keffiyeh in an effort to integrate with the local population. In the early 20th century, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the establishment of the British Mandate of Palestine, the keffiyeh took on political undertones. As resistance against British rule mainly came from rural Bedouin areas, many of the people undertaking it wore keffiyehs and used it as something of a rallying point. It also had the useful advantage of being able to hide the wearer's face to prevent identification. This came to a head in 1936 with the Arab Revolt, an uprising against British rule and Jewish immigration. The leaders issued a call for all men to wear a keffiyeh as a mark of solidarity with the revolutionaries and to make it harder for the authorities to identify them. In the 1950s, the color black became popular with Palestinians, as it is said they adopted it to contrast with the red keffiyehs worn by British-aligned forces. While this helped establish it as something of a Palestinian symbol, it was truly cemented as such in the 1960s, when it was adopted by Palestinian leaders, most notably Yasser Arafat, who was almost never seen without one. Militants would wear ones wrapped around their faces to conceal their identity, and throughout the world, other leaders and regular people supportive of the Palestinian cause started wearing one on occasion to demonstrate their solidarity. In the occupied territories during the 1980s, when at times the Palestinian flag was banned, the keffiyeh became something of an unofficial flag. With the conflict still unresolved, the keffiyeh remains a rallying symbol for Palestinians and a mark of support throughout the world for those in sympathy with them. One final item that I should mention is the Agal or Agal, a little cord worn above the keffiyeh in order to keep it in place. Traditionally made of goat hair, though now often made of other materials, it is said to have originally been used by goat herders to immobilize their livestock during milking, and was stored on the head when not used. Whether this is true or not, nowadays it is there to help keep the cloth on the head and prevent it from fluttering around. More ornate ones, sometimes metal or with metal weights, can be seen worn by Gulf royals. The keffiyeh, ghutra, shemagh, or all the other names given to it, continues to be widely worn to this day throughout the Arab world, even by the urban elite, in contrast to many traditional items of headwear around the world. Whether checked in red, black, green, blue, or plain white, it is part of formal wear in most of the Arabian Peninsula, worn daily by millions of people, usually draped over the head with an agal holding it in place. It is also worn by desert Bedouins, usually wrapped more tightly and covering the face to protect from sand and wind, which is probably the original way of putting it on. While Saudis, Bahrainis, and others will usually adopt more conventional Western clothing when traveling, Arab royals will, when making visit abroad, usually wear their full outfit, including ghutras when on state or even personal visits. Besides Arabs, keffiyehs or shemagh of some form or other, often in green or desert tan, have often been issued to European or American soldiers deployed in the Middle East or other desert regions, as it is a very versatile piece of equipment, something those Bedouins discovered millennia ago. Documented uses have included, beyond head and face covering, as a bandage, a haversack, a scarf for warmth, a face towel for sweat, pillow for resting, ankle brace, hand protector for holding odd objects, water filter, parasol when sitting, and many, many others. It remains popular for both Arab and non-Arab forces in hot climates. It has also, sometimes controversially, been used as a fashion item, particularly in countercultural circles. From punks to hipsters, it has been popularly used as a scarf rather than headgear, but while most people of Arab descent don't have a problem with this practice, or welcome the attention it brings to their culture, others worry that this commercialization and popularization dilutes the symbolism and meaning, and accuse companies of selling them of cultural appropriation. As in most such cases, as long as it is used with respect and understanding of its meaning, the overwhelming majority of people do not mind its use. And many people of Arab and particularly Palestinian descent in the West wear it, again often as a scarf rather than headgear, as a sign of their heritage, though in recent years it has sometimes led to their unfortunate targeting due to fraught connotations. Other unfortunate connotations that have been associated with it is its use by various militant or terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda or Daesh, who, especially in propaganda videos, often wear one wrapped around their head Bedouin style, sometimes with a headband with religious slogans written on it. They use it both to conceal their identity and attempt to project an Arab-Muslim cultural image. Hamas militants use it for the same purposes. However, while this image is heavily vehiculated in the media, it should be noted that it is a minority one, not representative of the rich cultural tradition around the keffiyeh. From a simple cloth used by desert Bedouins to protect themselves from the sun, sand, wind, and cold, the keffiyeh, shemagh, ghutra, or all the other names it is known by, has become a universally recognized marker of traditional Arab garb, and has acquired cultural, political, and historical symbolism far beyond what its simple design might have implied. And contrary to many other forms of traditional headwear, it seems to be thriving to this day, and unlikely to decline anytime soon. So I hope once again you found this video interesting and will join me again soon for another hat. Until then, with difficulty, I tip my keffiyeh to you. Sort of.